At 5:42 on a Tuesday morning, my apartment was so quiet I could hear the fridge humming and the neighbor's shower through the wall. My laptop screen was the only light in the kitchen, a pale blue rectangle on a table covered in coffee rings and old meeting agendas. My headset sat crooked on my head, and a half-eaten granola bar was glued to its wrapper by melted chocolate. That was my normal. My name's Gerald Whitfield, 48 years old, and for 15 years I'd been the guy nobody knew existed until something exploded. Then suddenly I was critical. I was the one who took calls at 3 in the morning from factories in Ohio, from maintenance managers in Germany, from night shift supervisors in Texas who swore the world was ending because a line had gone down for 11 minutes. That morning was textbook. At 5:45 I was on with a plant manager in Munich, listening to him breathe fire about a service-level breach that, technically, hadn't even happened yet. I let him vent. I pulled up the logs, walked him through the timestamps, pointed out the redundancy layer that had kicked in before his people even noticed the glitch. By the end of the call, his voice had dropped half an octave. He was thanking me, telling me, again, that if it weren't for me he'd have walked away from our company years ago. I didn't write that down anywhere. It went in the same place every other compliment went. The mental trash can labeled, "Keep your head down and keep the system running." 10 minutes later, our liaison in Manila pinged me about a backlog in onboarding forms. Someone in HR had decided to streamline the digital workflow. It took me 30 seconds to see they'd pushed an update that broke a required approval step for compliance. I patched the route manually, walked the liaison through a temporary workaround, logged the change, and filed yet another quiet ticket no one important would ever read. By 7 a.m., I'd already prevented 3 small fires and 1 potential explosion. And by 7:15, I was staring at an email that told me exactly how little that mattered. The subject line was harmless. Operations sync, attendance updated. The little preview text showed 3 words that made my stomach tighten. Removed, Whitfield, Gerald. I clicked it open anyway, like picking at a scab you know you should leave alone. The recurring meeting I'd started 10 years ago, the one where we coordinated the moving parts of our largest account, now had a neatly edited attendee list. My name wasn't on it. In its place, there was a new one. Austin Hartley, VP, Strategic Operations. Austin. He'd been at the company for exactly 4 weeks. The first time I saw him was in the hallway outside the main conference room, the one with the 2 bright lights and the thermostat that never worked. I was carrying a stack of printed reports because, unlike half the people in that building, the head of risk at Weber Industrial still liked paper. Austin was standing in the hall wearing loafers with no socks, tailored pants, and a navy blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. He was frowning at the office printer like it had personally offended him. Phone in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked up and said, almost like he was reading a script, that he was trying to get his phone to print wirelessly because he was all about frictionless workflows. Then he stuck out his hand and said he'd heard I basically ran the big account. The way he said basically told me everything. Guys like him don't like the idea that some middle-aged, slightly rumpled ops guy has more real power than their shiny title. They tolerate you right up until they figure out how to cut you out. At first, he played the part of the enthusiastic newcomer. He stopped by my desk, leaned on the partition, and asked questions that sounded thoughtful if you didn't know the system. He wanted to know how many touch points we had with Weber in a week, how many steps there were in our escalation flow, what our average response times were. I watched him scribble numbers on a yellow pad like he was solving a puzzle. I've been in corporate long enough to recognize the look. It's the same one engineers get when they're handed a machine they've never seen and told to make it more efficient by Friday. 2 weeks later, he was running meetings I used to run. Gerald, we're spinning up a quick huddle to talk about offshore opportunities. He told me one afternoon, as if he was inviting me to a barbecue. No need for you on this one. We'll loop you in later when we're ready to execute. He didn't loop me in later. Instead, I started seeing things shift around me, small at first. A new channel appeared in our messaging app, filled with words like lean, velocity, and cost optimization. Key docs I maintained got duplicated and re-uploaded under new names. The workflows I'd built were suddenly labeled legacy in slide decks he presented to leadership. He was good at it. I'll give him that. Not the work, but the theater. Austin had this brand of confidence that smelled like cologne. He walked into rooms as if the carpet had been rolled out specifically for him. He talked about disrupting old ways of working and unlocking efficiency. And people nodded because they were tired and he made it sound easy. At some point, he started using me as a punchline. I didn't see the message when it first went up. One of my analysts, Kevin, sent me a screenshot later. In a channel I wasn't in, Austin had posted a photo of a whiteboard covered in process boxes and arrows. Someone had written Gerald's flow at the top. Under it, Austin had typed, "Legacy operational clutter. Fun archaeology, but not how we scale winking face. No one tagged me. Nobody needed to." Kevin's message came with a hesitant note. "Hey, just thought you should know this is going around." I stared at the screen for a long time. I could have marched down the hall, opened Austin's door, and dropped 15 years of metrics and client testimonials on his desk. I could have reminded everyone that when Weber Industrial's production line went down at 3 in the morning last March, they didn't call our CEO. They called me. Instead, I took a breath, closed the chat, and opened something else. The contract folder. There's a moment, if you work too long in crises, where humiliation stops stinging and starts sharpening you. That was the moment for me. The edges inside my chest changed shape. The hurt didn't go away, it just became more precise. The thing about being just the ops guy is that, if you're paying attention, you see everything. You see who panics when there's an outage. You see which board member suddenly remembers your name when there's a risk of fines. You see which client insists on having your cell number, not the generic support line. You also remember which files matter. I didn't open the contract that night. Not yet. That came later. That morning, I was still doing what I always did. Keeping the wheels from coming off while the people up top spun fantasies about simplifying complexity. Around mid-morning, I had a run-in with Austin in the small conference room we used to call the fishbowl, because everyone walking by could see inside. He'd booked it for a quick sync and asked me to join. He was already there when I walked in, laptop open, a stack of printed slides in front of him. My slides, my metrics, my account health dashboards. He'd just changed the color scheme and added his name in the footer. He pointed at a chart and told me, in that smooth, rehearsed tone, how concerning it was that we still had so many manual steps in our escalation process. I watched him explain in detail why my own workflows were inefficient. At one point, he actually drew a box around a part of the flow I'd built and said, "This is where old ways of thinking slow us down. We'll phase this out." I remember feeling two things at once. The urge to laugh and the urge to flip the table. Instead, I nodded. I asked him what his timeline was. He said 90 days to move most of the commodity work offshore. He used the word commodity 3 times in 10 minutes. I didn't argue. I just asked one question. If legal had signed off on this, given the client's requirements. His eyes flicked away for half a second before he smiled again and said, "Legal works for us, not the other way around. We'll get them there." That was when the crawl in my chest started. If you've ever been slowly pushed out of a place you built, you know that feeling. It's not a sudden blow. It's a low-grade static, a buzzing under your ribs that won't turn off. Every calendar update, every meeting you're removed from, every email that goes out without you CC'd adds another decibel. By the third time I got dropped from a recurring call, the static became a sentence. They don't want you here anymore. That afternoon, I walked past the glass wall of another conference room and saw Austin standing at the head of the table, talking to half my old stakeholders. The screen behind him showed a slide with the words, "Operational Efficiency Phase 2, across the top. I couldn't see the rest, but I didn't need to. I went back to my desk, sat down, and opened the contract folder. The directory tree was familiar muscle memory. Main client agreement, amendments, regulatory addenda, risk assessments. I'd lived inside those documents in 2019, when everything had been chaos and we were trying to stay on the right side of new safety regulations. I hadn't thought about that phase in a long time. My cursor hovered over a file name, Weber _Mr. Agreement, executed. PDF. I didn't open it yet. I just sat there, staring at the screen, listening to the hum of the HVAC and the muffled sound of laughter from down the hall. 15 years earlier, I'd walked into this company as some mid-level guy with a laptop and a decent grasp of systems. Somewhere along the way, without anyone saying it out loud, I'd become the person our biggest client trusted to keep their production line from collapsing. Now, a 29-year-old with perfect hair and a pitch deck was erasing me in real time. I clicked the file. That was the first step. I didn't know it then, but that quiet double-click at my desk, while everyone else was busy nodding along to Austin's buzzwords, was the moment the story stopped being about how they were pushing me out and started being about how I was going to decide exactly how I left. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't sit in your muscles. It sits behind your eyes. That's what I felt as I stared at the contract PDF glowing on my screen. 15 years of my life were buried in those pages. Line after line of legal padding and operational language that only a handful of people in that entire company had ever bothered reading. But I remembered it. I remembered it because I'd been there when the entire thing was rewritten during one of the ugliest regulatory shakeups the manufacturing sector had ever seen. It was March 2019. The month everything in our world felt like it could snap with one wrong keystroke. Back then, Weber Industrial, the client whose name alone made executives sit straighter, was scrambling to keep up with new safety laws. Regulators were checking vendor escalation protocols with a microscope, demanding proof that support wasn't being passed around like a hot potato. Weber's board had already threatened to cut ties with half their partners, and they were very, very close to adding us to the list. Our CEO at the time, Charles Hartley, called an emergency meeting. I remember walking into the war room with a laptop under one arm and a binder full of escalation charts in the other. Everyone looked drained. Legal had been awake for 3 straight nights. Sales was panicking. Operations was blaming technology. Technology was blaming operations. The only one who wasn't panicking was Heinrich Weber. He didn't need a placard. He didn't need introduction. Heinrich had the posture of a man who'd pulled factory doors open during snowstorms and survived 3 recessions just by being too stubborn to fold. He sat across from me at the long table, adjusted his glasses, and said in a voice that could cut through steel, "We don't want generic help. We want continuity, person we can trust. Not a title, a name." At first, I didn't think he meant me, but then he turned, looked directly at me and said, "Gerald, when things break at 3 in the morning, you answer. Others give us excuses. You give us solutions. We want you, not your role." You. I was stunned. People at his level didn't talk like that. They didn't single anyone out, not unless they were about to blame you for something. But he was dead serious. He pushed a printed draft across the table. 3 red lines were drawn on the same paragraph. Escalation lead shall be a dedicated resource, mutually agreed upon by both parties. He crossed all of that out. Instead, in thick handwritten ink, he'd written, specifically, Gerald Whitfield. Our legal counsel, Patricia, leaned over my shoulder. I still remember her whisper, "This is highly unusual. You sure you're okay being named specifically? If you ever quit, they can walk. Not if they fire me. Not if they restructure. Only if I resigned voluntarily." I remember shrugging. I remember saying something stupid like, "They'd never let it get that unstable. God, if I had known." We negotiated the final wording for hours. Heinrich was unmovable. He didn't want promises, he wanted accountability. So we built the clause brick by brick. Section 6.4b, Continuity of Named Personnel. Legal language so dry and rigid it could crack teeth. But the meaning underneath? Nuclear. If I resigned of my own choice, Weber Industrial could terminate the entire multimillion-dollar agreement immediately. No penalties. No notice. No drawn-out arbitration. Just, we're done. When I signed my part of the paperwork, Heinrich shook my hand with a grip like a vice and said, "If they forget why you matter, this will remind them." I laughed at the time. I didn't laugh now. Back in the present, the glowing text on the screen felt like it was pulsing. My office suddenly felt too quiet, too small, like the walls were listening. Austin had no idea this existed. He thought he could cut me out, reroute work offshore, slap a new label on the framework I'd spent a decade perfecting, and no one would blink. He thought I was legacy clutter. The guy who should feel lucky just to have a chair in the building. But this clause, this one paragraph buried deep on page 47, said otherwise. It said I was the hinge the whole contract swung on. It said the customer wasn't tied to the company. They were tied to me. For a few minutes, I just sat there, fingers hovering over the trackpad, staring at my own name like I was reading a stranger's file. There was a strange pressure behind my ribs, not quite anger, not quite satisfaction. Something in between, something dangerous. I could end everything with one decision. But the thought that hit harder than that was, I didn't want to hurt my team. They were good people. They'd followed me through nightmares Austin couldn't even spell. They didn't deserve to get caught in the crossfire. So for a moment I closed the file. For a moment I breathed. Then I reopened it. Because pretending there wasn't a loaded weapon in front of me didn't make it disappear. I took a screenshot of the clause, saved a PDF copy, emailed both to myself, encrypted. Subject line, 6.4b, for record. No commentary, no explanation, just documentation, my language, my shield. Then I went one step further. I opened the company's secure legal repository, the place we all jokingly called the CYA Vault. Cover your ass. The place people only went when things were going south. I uploaded the entire original unedited agreement. I included a single note in the metadata. Original signed version March 2019. No alterations. I didn't forward it. Didn't hint at anything. Didn't leave breadcrumbs of malice. I simply ensured that if someone later wondered whether Austin had skipped something, the truth would already be sitting there, quietly ticking like a timer. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time that day, I wasn't tired. I was alert, focused, sharp. I'd been pushed out of meetings, out of decisions, out of the daily rhythm of the contract I'd nurtured for over a decade. But there was one thing they couldn't push me out of: the history. And the history had my name burned into the foundation. The next morning, things felt different. People weren't speaking to me differently, not exactly. No one had said anything outright. But in corporate environments, tension doesn't yell. It hums. It builds under conversations and between glances in hallways. At 9:13 a.m., I noticed something subtle. One of the junior legal associates, Rachel, sharp kid, nervous energy, kept glancing at me from the doorway as if she'd accidentally wandered into someone else's crime scene. 10 minutes later, Kevin approached me near the coffee machine. He pretended to fix his badge lanyard before muttering, "Hey, people are talking about some clause? Something with your name on it? Is that real?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I told him softly, "Don't forward anything to your personal email. Don't download unfamiliar files. Don't send screenshots to anyone outside your immediate team. Not right now." His eyes widened. He nodded. He understood. By noon, the rumor mill was running on pure adrenaline. 2 engineers from DevOps were whispering near the water cooler. A manager in risk walked by with the stiff posture of someone pretending not to know anything. Even the VP of Finance shot me a tight-lipped nod that felt more like a silent question. The company felt like a building full of people waiting for a fire alarm that hadn't gone off yet. At 1:30 p.m., an email popped up on my screen. From Patricia K., Senior Counsel. Subject: Quick Sync, 2 p.m. Location: Conference Room 5C. No agenda. No bullet points. No explanation. She didn't need to give one. We both knew exactly what this was about. At 1:58 p.m., I was already waiting in Conference Room 5C. She walked in 2 minutes later with a folder tucked under one arm and the kind of expression lawyers reserve for moments that could alter someone's career or the company's fate. She didn't sit at first. She just closed the door behind her, clicked the lock and said, "I saw your upload." I didn't pretend I didn't know what she meant. She placed the folder on the table but didn't open it. "Gerald, I need to be clear. I can't advise you to resign. Legally, ethically, I can't tell you to activate that clause." "I know," I said. "But," she continued, "I can tell you I've warned leadership multiple times about this named person requirement, and I can tell you those warnings were dismissed." Her eyes were steady. controlled. But there was something behind them. Fear? Frustration? Maybe both. She lowered her voice. If you choose to resign, the client has every right to walk immediately. And they will, Gerald. They like you. They trust you. They've always trusted you more than the company. I swallowed hard. I never intended to weaponize this. I know, she said quietly. That's what makes it powerful. There was a long moment of silence. Then she added, whatever happens next, document everything. She left without another word. I stayed there for a minute, staring at the empty chair across from me. My plan hadn't fully formed yet, but something had solidified in my chest. Something calm, heavy, and inevitable. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was gravity, pulling everything toward the point where it finally had to break. I spent that evening at home in the dim light of my kitchen, the contract still open on my laptop, a resignation letter drafted but unsent sitting beside it like a live wire. For hours, I weighed everything on two metaphorical scales. Staying, humiliation, a slow erasure, watching someone else dismantle the system I built. My career dissolving into corporate fog. Leaving, risk, unemployment. No safety net except whatever reputation I had left. Possibly dragging my team into the fallout. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from my daughter. Hey Dad, just checking in. Don't forget my tuition deadline is Friday. My throat tightened. That was when the decision crystallized. Not because of anger, pride, or ego, but because I realized something brutally simple. If they were willing to erase me, they didn't deserve to keep the system I built. I closed my laptop, straightened the resignation letter, placed my employee badge on top of it. Then I set a reminder on my phone. All hands meeting next Tuesday, 9 a.m. And beneath it another, execute. The room felt cold. Still, final. I'd spent 15 years preventing disasters. Next Tuesday, I was going to let one happen. On purpose. There are moments in your career you never forget. Not because they were triumphant, but because something inside you broke. Something you'd been holding together with hope, duct tape, and maybe tomorrow will be different. For me, that moment came the following Thursday at exactly 9:17 a.m. The all-hands meeting, a quarterly ritual of stiff collars, forced enthusiasm, and enough corporate jargon to suffocate a horse. Normally, I treated those meetings like ambient noise. I showed up, listened, shared my metrics, and got back to actually running the business. But that day, everything smelled different, felt different. Even the air in my home office had a strange tension to it. I logged into the Zoom link 3 minutes early. My camera off, my mic muted, my posture rigid. My resignation letter was folded neatly on the desk beside me. My badge lay on top of it like a paperweight holding down every decision I'd made to get here. I wasn't planning to resign in this meeting. That was for later, next Tuesday. The timing had to be perfect for the clause to activate with no loopholes. But the wound was already bleeding long before I took my shot. By 9 a.m., the screen filled with faces, squares of distracted executives, caffeinated managers, and employees pretending to multitask without getting caught. Some smiled too hard. Some didn't smile at all. Then Austin's camera turned on. He looked polished. A little too polished. New suit. Crisp white shirt. Hairstyled like he was about to give a TED Talk on disruption. "Morning team," he chirped, leaning toward his camera. "Excited to walk everyone through the progress we've made on our lean transformation initiatives." The sentence was so rehearsed I could practically see the cue cards taped behind his ring light. Behind him, a massive slide deck waited to be unleashed. One he'd proudly attached in the meeting invite the night before. I'd skimmed through it at midnight while eating cold takeout. Half the charts were my charts. But the captions made it look like he had dragged the company out of a burning building with his bare hands. I kept my camera off. I kept my face still. I kept every emotion locked behind my teeth. After the CFO droned through the financial updates and some VP announced a TikTok channel no one would ever watch, it was my turn. Or supposed to be. I saw my name appear on the agenda list in the shared screen. Client Health and Escalation Review, Gerald Whitfield. My cursor hovered over the unmute button. I wasn't planning a grandstand. I was planning to deliver my usual structured update, metrics, trends, risks, upcoming milestones, then get out of the spotlight. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could hint at what I was saving for next Tuesday. But Austin had other plans. I clicked share screen. My deck appeared for half a second. Then click. My deck vanished. And Austin's face enlarged on everyone's screens. Actually, he said brightly, speaking over me, I'll take this one. The room went silent. My mic light flickered, then turned gray. I tried to unmute. Nothing. He had disabled my presenter permissions. He had muted me in front of 137 employees, the founder, and several board members. The moment stretched like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. I froze, pointer still in my hand, mid-slide, mid-statistic, mid-breath. Austin smiled like a man delivering a punchline. Moving forward, he continued, Gerald won't be presenting updates for the Weber account. We're transitioning the project to our new offshore optimization team. Much leaner, much more scalable. Efficiency wins. There were polite nods, confused nods, a few wide eyes in the corners of the grid. My own square, camera still off, felt like a gravestone. But inside me, something dropped. Then something else rose. Cold, quiet heat. A clarity sharper than anger. He wasn't just sidelining me. He was erasing me. Erasing my work. Erasing the system I built with 15 years of sweat and midnight calls. I watched him stumble through my own metrics, mispronounce terminology I'd created, misinterpret graphs he didn't understand. He was reading the numbers like a man holding a treasure map upside down. And the executive team? They weren't impressed. Some of them weren't even hiding it. But it didn't matter. Humiliation has a taste. Bitter. Metallic. Like blood in your mouth after you bite down too hard. I swallowed it anyway. Then I did something he didn't expect. I closed my laptop. Right there. Mid-zoom. Mid-smirk. My screen went black. Let him wonder. Let him talk over dead air. Let him feel the absence and not understand why. Before the screen fully faded, I caught something in the gallery view. Patricia, our senior counsel, leaning forward, pen in hand, writing something down. And her expression wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Something shifted then, in the fabric of the company. And inside me, I didn't go home that night. I went to my office instead. The building was half lit and half empty. The air conditioning humming through the vents like a mechanical lullaby. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old manila folder labeled Continuity, 2019. The ink was fading. The corners bent. Inside were printed drafts of the original contract, annotated emails, escalation maps, risk impact analysis, my battlefield from that brutal spring. I slid the pages out, spread them across my desk, and found the one paragraph I needed. Section 6.4b. My name, in black ink, tied to everything. I whispered the words out loud without meaning to. If I resign, they can walk. I sat down hard in my chair. The room felt smaller, heavier. This wasn't some petty tool. This wasn't revenge on a spreadsheet-level manager. This was leverage. Real leverage. Enough to collapse the company's single largest revenue stream. Enough to remove the one thing Austin valued more than me, perception of control. But that wasn't why I was doing it. Not really. I was doing it because after that Zoom call, after hearing him talk over my work, my contributions, my legacy, I knew one truth with a clarity I couldn't ignore. If I didn't walk away on my terms, they would erase me entirely. I spent the next hour crafting my resignation letter. Not dramatic, not emotional, just clean, factual, time-stamped. Then I placed my badge on top of it. Not to turn it in, not yet, but to remind myself of the date I'd set. Next Tuesday, 9:01 a.m. That time wasn't random. That was the moment the all-hands meeting next week would be under full recording, with leadership present. It was also the moment Section 6.4b would activate, cleanly and without dispute. But there was one more hour of that night I remember more than the rest. Around 11, As I sat in the dim glow of my desk lamp, I heard a knock on my office door. Soft, hesitant. Kevin. He stepped in, holding his laptop to his chest like a shield. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Gerald, is it true? About the clause. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just motioned for him to close the door and told him quietly, keep your head down this week. Don't save anything to your personal drive. Don't get pulled into conversations you don't need to be in. And take care of yourself. He swallowed. Hard. Are you leaving? I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anything. He left without another word. I sat back in my chair and stared at the dark window. My reflection looked tired. Older than 48. Maybe older than 50. But behind the exhaustion, something had returned. My spine. My voice. My choice. For the first time in months. Maybe years. I felt like I wasn't letting life happen to me. I was choosing the battlefield. Choosing the time. Choosing the terms. And the moment Austin muted me on that Zoom call, he signed his own fate. He just didn't know it yet. There's a certain kind of quiet that hits an office or a company before a disaster. A stillness. A hush. Like the air knows something the people don't yet. That was the quiet in my apartment the following Tuesday at 8:59 a.m. The all-hands meeting link was open. My camera was off. My microphone muted. My badge lay beside my keyboard, the plastic reflecting a thin line of morning light. My resignation letter sat on top of a black folder, the timestamp freshly signed. And behind me, my Zoom background was set. Plain black, stark white letters. Effective 9:01 a.m. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even nervous. I felt precise, like every emotion had been sharpened into a single point. I waited. At exactly 9 a.m., the cameras started popping on one by one like stage lights. Executives stiff and alert. Managers half awake with forced smiles. Associates pretending they hadn't spent all weekend whispering about the clause. Then Austin's square lit up. He looked unusually bright today. Too bright. Like someone who had prepared his victory speech in advance. Good morning, team, he chirped. The same tone he used when talking about synergy or transformation. Excited to share the incredible momentum we've seen since launching our offshore initiative. He grinned into the camera. Steady, confident, utterly unaware that everything he believed was solid beneath him was really wet sand. He launched into his script, talking about lean operating capacity, global scalability, cost efficiencies. Words that meant nothing and everything at the same time. The chat was quiet. Too quiet. He didn't notice. I did. I waited until he switched to the slide titled, Next Phase of Optimization. And at 9 hours and 31 seconds, right as he inhaled to continue, I clicked my camera on. Just like that, my square appeared in the center of the grid. A face people hadn't seen in a month. A presence they thought had been phased out. The reaction was immediate. A few cameras flickered. One person dropped their mug. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." But their mic caught only the first syllable. I didn't greet anyone. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply stared straight into the lens, expression flat, steady, final. In my right hand, I held my employee badge. In my left, raised at shoulder height, was the signed resignation letter, timestamp clear as day. And behind me, filling the frame, effective 9:01 a.m., the meeting went silent, absolutely silent. Even the ambient noises of keyboards and breathing seemed to freeze. Austin blinked. Once, twice. His mouth opened just slightly. Gerald, let's discuss this offline, he managed, voice tightening at the edges. I didn't unmute. I clicked mute again, not because it did anything, but because the gesture made it clear. You don't get to silence me. I silence myself. On my terms. Patricia's square sat 2 rows down. She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes at the letter in my hand. She squinted, registered the timestamp. Then her gaze snapped sideways, toward the founder's square, which was camera off but very much present. Austin kept rambling, voice rising slightly, trying to regain the illusion of control. We appreciate your contributions, Gerald. We're in a transitional period. This isn't the forum for. I didn't blink. People weren't listening to him anymore. They were staring at the words behind me, staring at the timestamp, staring at my name, staring at the badge, staring at the man they'd spent a week whispering about. The chat exploded. Private message from Jessica. Is that legit? Private message from unknown. Clause 6.4b. Holy sh*t. Private message from Rachel L. Does he realize what he just activated? And then, at 9:01 on the dot, I held their gaze for one last second and clicked leave meeting. The screen vanished. The call window closed, and I exhaled for the first time in months. At 9:06 a.m., my phone buzzed. Patricia K. Call me. Now. Before I could respond, it buzzed again. Kevin. What did you do? Jessica. Austin is freaking out. A manager from sales. Is the contract at risk? Tell me it's not. Someone from finance? Is this about that clause? But the message that mattered hit at 9:15. A simple text. International number. One name attached. Heinrich Weber. The man from 2019. The one who insisted my name be inked into the contract. His text had just 3 words. Is it true? I responded with one. Yes. He called immediately. No greeting. No pleasantries. Gerald, are you officially gone? Yes. Static crackled on the line as he exhaled sharply through his nose. Then we're done with them. He hung up. No debate. No hesitation. Just German precision slicing through the corporate fog. By 12:40 p.m., the company received the formal notice. Subject: activation of Clause 6.4b, immediate termination of agreement. It was 1 page. Cold. Surgical. Final. Within an hour, the entire building was in meltdown. Board members dropped commitments. Investors demanded an emergency call. Chats were filled with frantic messages. Is the clause real? What does this mean for Q4 revenue? Did leadership know? Who approved this transition? Why did Austin mute him? Someone, nobody knows who, forwarded the founder's internal email to half the company. The subject line became legend. You muted the named person. Inside, a single sentence stood out. You don't silence the individual the contract is built on and expect no consequences. By Friday, Austin was temporarily relieved of duties pending investigation. Corporate translation. They were figuring out how to fire the founder's son without a family civil war. People say karma comes slowly. That's a lie. Sometimes karma arrives like a freight train. As for me, I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't write a single snarky message. I slept for 12 hours straight. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Weber Industrials HR. Subject: consulting offer, confidential. They wanted continuity, not from the company, from the person who had kept them alive for 15 years. I accepted. My new office wasn't big or flashy, but it overlooked the production line. For the first time, I saw the machines I'd been rescuing from a distance all these years. I wasn't a firefighter anymore. I was valued, paid fairly, listened to. On my first afternoon, the receptionist walked in with a bouquet of deep red roses. Elegant, heavy. No card, just a small folded note. I opened it. If you ever want to come back, we'll do it your way this time. CH, the founder. I didn't smile, didn't tear up. I folded the note and placed it in my drawer beside the printed copy of Section 6.4b. Funny thing, I never raised my voice. I never threatened anyone. I never fought back the way they expected. I just made sure they finally read the contract they'd been ignoring. The one with my name on it. And then I walked away. On my terms. There's a strange peace that comes after you burn a bridge on purpose. Not the peace of triumph. Not the peace of victory. It's quieter than that. Like the silence in your chest finally matches the silence in the world around you. That was the peace I felt the week after the contract collapsed. But peace doesn't last long in corporate America. Not when $14 million evaporate in 21 hours. And definitely not when the fuse that lit the explosion had my handwriting on it. On my third morning at Weber Industrial, as their newly minted senior continuity consultant, I pulled into the parking lot at 6:45 a.m. The sun was barely up. Frost clung to the windshields. Inside the building, the heating system clicked through old vents like a machine exhaling after a long night. It wasn't glamorous. The hallway walls were a little scuffed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee machine sputtered like it was on its last leg. But it felt honest. It felt like a place where the work mattered more than the presentation. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking into a battlefield where everyone smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. A tall man in a mustard-colored jacket waved at me as I walked in. Maintenance. I'd seen him twice already. He nodded with a familiarity that corporate people rarely allow themselves. "Morning, Gerald," he said. "Morning," I replied. Simple, human, real. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that. My new office was small. Barely big enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked older than half the people at my old company. The window overlooked the manufacturing floor. At 7:12, the machines began roaring to life. Metal arms, conveyor belts, the rhythmic hiss of pneumatics. The sound was oddly comforting. This was the world I'd spent 15 years supporting from afar. Seeing it in motion, hearing the heartbeat of the factory in real time, made everything I'd fought for feel tangible. I had just taken a sip of terrible breakroom coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I didn't need caller ID. I knew exactly who it was. I answered. "Hi, Charles." The founder of my previous company let out a slow breath. "So you picked up. Good." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the factory floor. "You sent flowers to my apartment, Charles. I figured a call was coming eventually." He chuckled softly. "You always did prefer direct conversations." "I always preferred honest ones." A pause. "You know I didn't mute you," he said. "I wasn't even the host." "I know. And you know I warned them about tampering with the contract terms." "I know that too." Silence stretched between us. Not tense. Not hostile. Just 2 men acknowledging the truth of a collapsed structure. Finally, he said, "Walking away like that, it took guts." "It took 15 years," I replied. Another quiet breath. "Gerald, I want you back. Name your role, your team, your salary. I'll handle the politics." I closed my eyes. That offer would have made me dizzy 5 years ago. Maybe even a year ago. But not now. "Charles," I said gently, "I don't think there's enough left there for me to come back to." "That's because Austin hollowed it out," he snapped. "And everyone let him." I didn't disagree. He lowered his voice. "Let me fix this." "You can fix the company, Charles," I said. "But you can't fix what it cost me to stay that long." He didn't respond. He didn't argue. He just breathed quietly on the other end of the line. The sound of a man realizing a truth he'd ignored for too long. Before he hung up, he said something I will never forget. "You didn't burn the bridge, Gerald. You just stopped holding it up." The call disconnected. I stared at my phone for a long time. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just set the phone down gently. Because he was right. At 9 a.m., I joined a meeting with Weber's risk team. 4 people crowded around a long table, their laptops covered in stickers, papers spread everywhere. They talked fast, asked sharp questions, scribbled notes. They didn't treat me like a replacement for their old vendor. They didn't treat me like a consultant passing through. They treated me like an expert, like someone whose experience wasn't just appreciated, but needed. The meeting went long, 90 minutes instead of 60. When it ended, Heinrich walked up to me, clasped my shoulder and said, "Feels better having you on our side of the fence." "It feels better being on this side," I admitted. He nodded once. "They didn't deserve you." I didn't respond. Some truths don't need confirmation. At lunch, I ate alone in the break room, watching employees slowly drift past the vending machines and microwaves. Nobody wore fancy badges. Nobody acted like royalty. Nobody used phrases like thought leadership or scalable transformation. People here spoke plainly. Machine 2's acting up again. Can you swap shifts Friday? Coffee's terrible today. Boss wants numbers before 3. It was refreshing. While I ate, my phone buzzed again. A notification from a friend still at my old company. A screenshot. Austin's desk, empty. Monitor gone. Drawers open. Nameplate missing. Caption. He's out. Effective immediately. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not in triumph. Not in satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement of gravity doing what gravity does. You don't walk up to a fault line, stomp your feet, and then act surprised when the ground gives way. That evening, as I left the building, the sky was a soft orange fading into gray. Cold air bit at my fingers. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one. I paused beside my car, letting the weight of everything settle. 15 years of work. 15 years of midnight calls. 15 years of solving other people's messes, patching other people's holes, protecting a company that didn't protect me back. I thought about the humiliation on that Zoom call, the mute button, the stolen slides, the email calling me legacy clutter. I thought about my daughter's text message, asking about tuition, trusting that I'd always find a way. And I thought about Section 6.4b. My name baked into a sentence that no one had bothered to read except the man who made me sign it. Funny how life works. The thing they ignored became the thing that freed me. I unlocked my car and got in, sitting for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, letting the heat slowly warm my fingers. A single thought settled in. I didn't destroy anything. I simply refused to be erased. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed softly in the cup holder. A message from Rachel, the junior legal associate at my old company. Just so you know, a lot of us were rooting for you, even when we couldn't say it. I stared at the message, then typed back, "Take care of yourself. Document everything." She replied with a little laughing emoji and a "will do." I put the phone face down. The road ahead was clear, quiet, open. The factory lights glowed behind me like a faint constellation. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I felt like I was walking toward something new, something I chose, something that chose me back. And after everything, every insult, every erasure, every moment of patience mistaken for weakness, there was one truth I couldn't ignore. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is simply walking away and letting the truth catch up. I turned onto the main road, the city unfolding ahead of me, and let the future come without fear. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. Finally,